No, I grew up in Michigan, and
Michigan.
I've only been in LA for just under 2 years.
Ah,
So I'm from Kalamazoo, Michigan, originally,
wow.
born and raised.
Home of
Um,
Gibson.
yeah, absolutely,
Nice. All right.
absolutely. Yeah, it's a real place.
Wow.
Um,
Nice.
yeah, a very interesting place. And then before I came to Los Angeles, I was in Chicago for about 10 years.
Okay.
I did my undergrad at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago
Oh,
and
very
worked.
prestigious school.
Yeah, it's a great school. It was a lot of fun, a lot of freedom. I come from basically my entire immediate family is all musicians.
Oh,
Most of them professionally, actually.
wow.
So my older sister is a classical clarinetist. My older brother is a singer-songwriter. Um, both of my parents studied music in college and now play in local symphonies, and my mom sings in a chorus and plays guitar. So I studied music when I was younger, but sort of left off of it. I like to joke that after the middle C broke on our piano, that kind of was the last straw for me. So I did study music for a number of years, but I think for me it always came into an interesting place when it came to performance. Um, where I think some of my sort of like social tendencies or kind of fear of getting up in front of an audience as a single person and performing something I think also really played into it.
What did you?
Yeah.
So, what exactly did you? What
I,
instrument?
I
Did you
played piano for about 5 years when I was young, so
From what age to what age?
probably age maybe 6 or 7 to 11 or 12, I think.
Uh-huh.
And I was pretty decent. I kick myself now for giving it up because I wish I could play as well as I could back then. But yeah, again, it's funny looking back because I didn't really, as a young person, I didn't really make that connection between music and the kind of like social opportunities that it can really afford. And to me, it was just like, oh, this music is kind of boring. I'm not really into it. From a sound perspective, but then also I'm just didn't really click for me that there was this entire kind of social dynamic to music and to performing and sort of interacting with people in an interesting way. Which so I think with this project I've kind of picked back up on that.
We're going to
Yeah,
get to the project, but
yeah.
I want people to understand your journey. If you
It's
don't mind.
absolutely no. It's definitely been a journey, and I think also just being the youngest sibling of this family, where there's so many musicians. I feel like those kinds of performative roles were sort of already taken. So I think I kind of came to it in this roundabout way.
Kind of wanted to approach it in a different way.
Definitely, but still very, very
Just to be
yeah.
different.
Absolutely, right. But still very steeped in a lot of music just around the house and growing up. Yeah.
So from Kalamazoo,
Hmm.
you 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 did your undergraduate at Chicago Art Institute.
Yeah, I did.
And how that happened?
Well,
Why did you choose that?
it's interesting. So I think all through high school, I had been at this really intense math and science college prep high
Oh,
school.
what's the name of that?
It's called the Kalamazoo Area Mathematics and Science Center. So
Oh,
it's
brain.
well, yeah, and
Are you
it's
Netza or anything like that?
no,
No?
I'm very much the Groucho Marx subscriber to I don't want to be part of any club that would have me as a member. So
Nice.
no Mensa, but
Okay.
yeah. So all through high school was this really intense, very kind of traditional math and science and computer science, and very very rigid, very rigorous. So I was just studying like crazy, working really hard, and I was I did okay, but my heart wasn't really in it.
What was your forte?
Well, I really like the computer science quite a bit, and that's something I still do a lot is computer programming for much more creative purposes than what I was doing then, which is just like basic computer science. Yeah, exactly. And I think, like I said, there's a parallel to my experience with music, which is with math and science. I felt really frustrated that there wasn't kind of an avenue for some of the more social dynamics and more creative pursuits to sort of like come together with that. In high school, it's just this very dry kind of like, here's the subject and, that's what it is, and study it and learn it in this very kind of rote way. And so during that time, I was also just kind of for fun taking art classes at the Kalamazoo Art Institute, which is a nice little museum there. So I did a lot of photography, studied photography for probably like 4 years in high school, just kind of for fun. And sure,
excuse me.
no, yeah, I definitely wasn't the norm, and I think also, there were a lot of students who were musicians also, but again, it kind of I think really got pushed into this sort of like achievement based pursuit, where it wasn't really just for fun. It was like about having a skill and about sort of doing it in a way that would look good on a college application, much more so than just like jamming out or just having fun or just doing it for kind of like the social nature of interacting with other musicians. So that I found really frustrating. What I saw is like a pretty rigid math and science pathway, and sort of that model for, you work really hard in high school, you go to, you get into a good college, and then you have this kind of research job, which didn't really appeal to me. And so I kind of told myself, well, I want to learn more about sort of creative processes, and I want to, kind of explore more some of these artistic pursuits that I've been doing kind of on the side in a more serious way. So I applied to art school and ended up in Chicago.
Which colleges were you looking at?
I was looking at the Rhode Island School of Design. That was actually my first choice. Yeah, but it's, well, like the Art Institute, it's very expensive. And
You get Brown.
yeah, exactly. And where else did I look? I looked at, I think, the Maryland Institute College of Art, MICA, has a good undergrad program. And then,
Incredible.
yeah, I'm sure it's a very prestigious school. I've had some classmates after undergrad that have gone there that speak highly of it.
Yeah.
So I applied there, and then a couple other state colleges, but ended up getting accepted to the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, and they gave me a pretty decent financial aid package.
Nice.
I had my mother's side of the family is from Chicago, so my sister lived there already, so there was kind of a base there already for me to go to. And at 18 I was just like chomping at the bit to get out of Kalamazoo, get out of my parents' house, and get into a big city and just kind of
Big city with the same weather.
Yeah, the weather out there is brutal. It's really tough. It's a really tough winter.
Lake freezing thing going on.
Man, yeah, you guys are spoiled here in Los Angeles. It's just summer every day. Yeah. So came to art school at 18 and just kind of really enjoyed it. It was, very experimental, and I came looking back now, knowing very little about art or art history or making art, or really kind of, jumping whole hog into like being a person who does creative production, and what does that mean, and when it's so open, like what do you gravitate towards, and what do you do, especially at a place like SAIC, where it's pretty non-traditional, and you're really kind of pushed to be very experimental. So
Who are some of your mentors?
John Cates was a really great mentor. He's in the film, video, new media department there. So who else? Ken Fandel was in the photography department. Who else? I worked with Jason Sullivan, who is no longer there, but he was doing a lot of like experimental programming. And I mean, really, I don't think I had a bad class there. It's like everybody there's very, very talented, and was really great to kind of be pushed in all sorts of different directions and kind of see what came to the surface. Yeah.
And you made a lot of contacts
Mm.
with fellow students with the same mindset.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Right. And so, I think it was a big part of it was really kind of forming those relationships and, getting to know my classmates, getting to know my professors. And I feel like that I was able to sort of work in as a theme to a lot of the artwork that I made. So kind of built into a lot of the things that I do is sort of like a structure for interacting with other people, or almost like an excuse to interact with people in a certain way.
What year did you graduate?
I graduated in 2006. Yeah.
I'm curious, were there other fellow students, who had this sort of, knew how to write algorithms and understood the whole digital?
Some, yeah. And I wouldn't say I was a complete exception. And luckily for me, SAIC is a place where it's a lot different than some much more traditional art programs, which would just be plastic media like painting and drawing and sculpture and nothing else, So it was it was great because it was so liberal, and they had whole departments doing art and technology and doing experimental programming, experimental sound. So there already was like a really good precedent for that kind of pursuit in artwork. So cool. That was great, and I didn't really I wasn't really aware of that coming into it, but looking back now, I'm like, wow, I was so lucky to be exposed to a place like that versus a much more traditional art department might have been completely different. Yeah.
Are there still traditional art departments?
There are. As a matter of fact, yeah. I mean, and I don't want to name names, but right there.
So they're out there.
There are, and it's I think it's a really interesting time right now because they're just kind of starting to tip where a lot of those older, more established faculty are either retiring or leaving. So there's kind of this new guard coming up, which is great. Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of the things that I'm interested in kind of get cast off into like labeled as something like media art or new media or new genres or whatever kind of label you want to put on it. But it I think it's nice right now that those two are kind of merging together. So you get this much more liberal approach to art making that isn't as biased towards one media over another, which I think is really great and exciting. Yeah, hopefully it's healthy.
What did you do between graduating Chicago and starting at UCLA?
So in between, after I left SAIC, I almost immediately started working there. I was a technician in the IT department, actually. So I was working mostly with the design and architecture departments there. And I ran digital prototyping labs, so I was doing things like laser cutting and 3D printing and 3D scanning, to kind of help students, doing these creative projects use these technical tools to execute whatever they were doing. So that was really fun. I got to play with all kinds of crazy, technological toys and software, and kind of basically like develop training to let students and faculty, kind of get exposure to these machines and learn how to use them.
Did they have anything like a 3D printer?
Yeah. We had a 3D printer, which was really cool. And, I started the position basically as they got that equipment. So they're just kind of, and nobody really knew how to use it. So they're just like, get in there, learn how to use it. Yeah,
tell us.
Exactly, which was really cool. So it's just like, go play with this stuff and then tell us how to use it. So for me, that was great to kind of just like have full access to these machines and play with them, and I think luckily as someone who's kind of adept at these technical things and working with the software, it was really open for me. So I could kind of just experiment and do things that are fun and then, kind of roll that into things that are useful for other people, as they come to approach these tools.
Can you tell us the difference between a 3D printer and a CNC machine?
I absolutely can. So basically, a 3D printer is additive. So you start with an empty space and you build up material, kind of like building something out of Legos or bricks. So you're building up this component material in layers until you have an object. CNC routing or milling is reductive. So you start with a chunk of a material and you carve away at it until you have your thing. So kind of like sculpting marble or clay, maybe. So that's the main difference. And then, yeah, so it's kind of similar ends, but different things. With CNC milling and routing, you have a lot more flexibility of material. So you can cut, wood or plastic or, wax or,
Metal.
yeah, metal, really hard things like stone. Whereas with 3D printing, it's a lot more limited. So it's generally things like plastics or there's other 3D printers that will use kind of like a powdered, almost like a plaster. There are some now that can do more advanced materials like metals or glass, which are really cool, but those are super expensive.
In terms
Yeah.
of additive metal, how does that work? It's not liquid, is it?
It's not liquid all the time, but the way that I understand it is it's actually a metal powder, and then there's a laser that will sort of burn each layer, and that actually turns molten.
Wow, isn't
Yeah.
that amazing?
It's totally crazy. It's totally crazy. Yeah. So and the 3D scanning also is a whole awesome thing. So it's this kind of like mix of photography and sort of like and video and sculpture like all in one. So it's really exciting
So
to
it's
kind
like
of
a
like
CAD program.
similar,
3D
similar,
CAD, but
similar.
It's got this other thing where it's going to make something.
Absolutely, absolutely, right.
That's amazing.
Yeah, so it's this really cool bridge between like the physical and the virtual, and you can kind of take the some of the good elements from each and kind of use them to your advantage. So that was really fun to,
Isn't that amazing?
yeah, to play and experiment with those machines was really cool.
Imagine if Harry Parts had it through.
Yeah, and as a matter of fact, for this project, I did use the CNC router to produce these. So
Oh,
yeah,
that makes
yeah,
sense.
yeah.
So,
Sure.
Okay, so you're working, and then all of a sudden you say to yourself, I think I'll go get a master's.
Yeah, well, there's a little bit in between. So
Right.
at the same time I was working the tech job, I was also teaching part-time at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. So
What were you teaching?
I taught a few different classes. One was called Art Mods. So that was a class about hacking commercial video games and modifying them for art-making purposes,
Oh,
which
nice.
that was really fun.
That's cool.
Yeah, and that kind of went back to some work that I did, just personal artwork that I did in my undergrad. So that kind of, set the stage for that course. And I was just kind of like teaching the techniques that I used to make that artwork and, kind of talking about a lot of the artistic aesthetic opportunities that video games set up for artists. And then a couple other classes were more geared towards doing the kinds of like software design that you would need to work with, the CNC router, the 3D printer, stuff like that. So a little bit more software based for actual like producing physical objects. So, I was teaching just a little bit, just like one class a semester, and I really liked it, but without a master's, it's really hard to kind of get more into like a full-time position. So, I was a little bit stuck where it's like I could keep doing my day job and then teaching a class, which, that's a lot of hours to work. That's like a, 50, 60-hour week. So I was like, man, if I want to do more teaching, I need to go back and get a master's. At the same time, from working a full-time job, it's just really hard to be able to set the time aside to make artwork or do creative things. So I was, wanted to do a full-time master's program so that I could kind of just like take that chunk of time and kind of go back to, developing my creative practice and, networking with professors and with other students more than I was able to do, just working 9 to 5.
What were your
Yeah.
options at that point? What colleges were you looking at? Universities?
I looked at quite a few different ones. I only ended up applying to 3, but
Which were?
came down to UCLA, the University of Chicago MFA program, and then the MIT Media Lab.
That makes sense.
Yeah, and I had also looked at the MIT. I think the other program is called Visual Arts and Culture, which I didn't end up applying there, but I looked there, and then also Carnegie Mellon's MFA program. So yeah, it took it took a couple years to kind of like go meet all these people and go to these different programs and kind of see what the landscape looked like. But yeah, for me, UCLA was awesome. So the program I'm in is called Design Media Arts, which is in the School of the Arts and Architecture. So it's an MFA program It's a little bit more focused on technology and kind of and media, which those were kind of my interests anyway. So that's been great, and I haven't really looked back since I came out here. It's been really successful.
Do you have pictures of your installation at the
I do.
show?
I do. Yeah, so we can put those up.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Can I have those?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So at this point, we'll probably be showing those.
Great.
Nice.
Here they are.
Now, the video that you're
Mhm.
going to show us, that's was that part of your master's program?
It was. I mean, it wasn't. So, with this kind of a program, it's very open-ended. So we can kind of do pretty much whatever we want as long as we're doing some kind of, creative production. So in that sense, it was. And, it was part of the artwork that I did, during my master's program.
Is that because there's a kind of this vertical depository of knowledge where the students may know just as much as the
Absolutely.
teachers at this
Absolutely.
point, since it's such a new
Absolutely, absolutely, right. And I think one of the strengths of that department is it's so diverse. So I mean, you have people that are architects, you have people that are computer scientists, you have designers like print designers, and on and on. So all these different kind of disciplines coming together. So you get this really, really diverse, sometimes like cacophonous set of voices and concerns and perspectives. But yeah, it ends up being great because it's not it's much less kind of hierarchical than some other departments where it's like the professor is the expert and the students are just learning. It's exactly it's much more democratic, which is fantastic. And yeah, I mean, there are students who are already coming into the program just extremely talented at programming or at doing projection mapping, things like that. So yeah, it's a really great, really talented group of people.
Nice. Yeah. And you were there for 2 years?
Yep, 2 years. Yeah, so I just finished this spring.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And yeah, I'm sad it's over, but I'm also kind of glad that it wasn't any longer.
So
yeah.
Let's.
So this is the linguaphone of tremulous communion.
Say that again slowly.
The linguaphone of tremulous communion.
All right. Communion.
Yeah.
So religious connotation.
A little bit, but also about kind of I think there's some aspects of communication and about sort of coming together. So this is actually an instrument specifically made for two people to play at once. So each person bites on either end of it in order to play it, and by biting it, it allows your head to actually act as the resonant chamber. So the vibrations from the metal tines as you pluck them transfer through your teeth to your head.
Okay.
So you get this kind of shared vibrational auditory experience between you and the other player, but you're the only ones who can really hear it.
Right.
So people standing nearby, can kind of hear it a little bit, but it's nothing near the intensity of what you get when you're actually biting it. So there's kind of always this layer of subjectivity where it's like you never really know what the other person is hearing, right? Like it's always this kind of question of like, it's unique to everybody, and it's like part of that is going to be physical based on the shape of your head, but part of it is also just kind of perceptual. And again, I think it really a lot of my thinking about sort of audience performer relationships comes into this too. Like I was saying earlier, growing up around so many musicians, I kind of have this unique perspective where there's almost this competitive thing where it's like if you're not up performing, then somebody else is going to do it. So it's like a lot of times I was relegated to the audience, and I'm just like, man, I don't quite want to perform in the same way that my siblings and my other family members are, but at the same time I don't want to just sit in the audience, and be passive. So, I think I'm interested in kind of exploring alternatives and kind of, I think this is a really successful approach to that in sort of just revamping, what an audience relationship, audience performer relationship looks like. So, with this you really get basically two performers, but also a two-person audience.
Should we, speaking of two-person, should we do that?
Yeah, do you want to try it?
People understand.
Absolutely, and maybe we can
it's
sort
also
of
on the video, I would
Yeah.
assume, right?
yeah.
So we're gonna bite this.
Yeah. And you just fuck it.
So what I'm getting is kind of a kalimba-like thing,
Yeah, yeah.
but it's more than that because of the resonance inside my bone structure, I guess.
Yeah.
And so it's not just this oral sensation; it's more of a body sensation.
It's pretty physical, and it kind of leaves you vibrating for a little bit after you play it. But yeah, kalimba was one instrument that I looked at, as I was kind of developing this. Kind of that and the jaw harp were sort of the two instruments that I kind of experimented with and studied a lot in building this. This was the iteration that I used for the workshop that we'll see in the video. So that was a kind of community workshop that was sponsored by the Hammer Museum here. And mostly it just came down to budget. So, we ended up making 100 kits for instruments.
Goodness, really?
Yeah. And yes, it is. Yeah. But
okay.
right. So it's really a factor of scale and the budget that they had to work with. I think it would be great to do.
That's ginormous, though.
Yeah, and we ended up, I think we did about 80 or 85 completed kits just in one night at the Hammer Museum, which was a lot of fun.
I don't know either. Give it a go. Come on. Give it a go. Okay. Yeah, I'm going to cross that as well. Get the dust off, please. That's a special moment with a stranger right there. Right? Like, she's naked.
Sorry, I almost cut you down. Yeah, right. What's the difference between a peanut and a blue?
I asked them if they both got.
Just for people playing, not for an audience.
Okay. It's interesting because normally instruments are meant for an audience. I like that concept.
You make instruments by doing it in your mouth, you and another person, but the only two people that can hear it are you and the other person.
That's so cool.
How'd you come up with the whole concept of this? I wanted to make something that was like 14 people to kind of like force you into like an intimate. Oh, that's really cool. Yeah.
That's cool. I like it.
It sounds like Aboriginal music. Aboriginal, like